The spoon shook a little as Unaritzia Karl Hoffman raised it to his lips, sampling real milk for the first time in 2 years. Actual milk? Not the powdered replacement that was the usual thing in the Afrika Korps since 1941. The sweet cream on his tongue went against everything the German army had told him about American supplies. In his secret journal, tucked away under his bed, he would write things that could have gotten him disciplined by the Nazi officers in his own quarters. The Americans feed their captives better than Germany feeds its own soldiers. June 4th, 1943, Mexia, Texas. Through the dining hall windows at the new camp 4 miles from town, he could see American guards informally eating sandwiches piled high with meat. Before we dive in, tell us in the comments where you're tuning in from. And if stories of heroes appearing in the darkest hour thrill you, then hit subscribe, because we're just getting started. In the Afrika Korps, his unit had lived on 300 grams of canned meat and 125 grams of hard bread as their everyday portion, with seized British supplies added in when they were fortunate. Yet here, in a country that Nazi information had portrayed as a nation made soft by outside influence and democratic ways, food seemed to have no end. That morning, 1,150 experienced soldiers of Field Marshal Erwin Rommel's famous Afrika Korps walked into the dining hall. It wasn't a field kitchen with a horse-drawn wagon dishing out watery soup, nor was it the sand-spoiled rations of North Africa. It was a fully furnished dining building with electric refrigerators, steam tables, and large-scale dishwashers. Each set of 5 barracks had its own dining hall with cooks, waiters, silverware, and, by all reports, very good food. The whole town of Mexia had come out to see their arrival, gazing at the tanned, healthy enemy soldiers parading down Railroad Street. What none of the townspeople knew was that this breakfast would set off the deepest mental shock in the modern history of war prisoners. The methodical destruction of Nazi ideas about race through the simple act of eating. The numbers behind American farm output were being served not in informational pamphlets, but on metal trays piled with eggs, bacon, white bread, butter, jam, and real coffee. Their perspective on the world would fall apart, not just from being defeated in battle, but through a daily encounter with impossible abundance. The trip to this point had started on May 13, 1943, in Tunisia. General Jürgen von Arnim, Rommel's replacement after the Desert Fox was called back to Germany, gave up along with about 275,000 German and Italian soldiers. The Afrika Korps, which had pushed the British back to the edge of Cairo and earned the grudging admiration of Montgomery himself, was suddenly captured. Among them was Obergefreiter Franz Müller, who held the Iron Cross Second Class, an experienced soldier of the Poland and France campaigns, and a survivor of 2 years in the North African desert. His story, found many years later in the National Archives, would give historians the most detailed portrayal of German soldiers' food shock while captured in America. We had been living on 750 grams of bread, 150 grams of fat, and 120 grams of sausage or tinned fish daily when supplies got to us, he wrote. More often, we got by on dates, seized rations, or nothing at all. The journey from defeat to discovery started in the holding pens at Tunis. As Müller and 30,000 other captives waited in temporary camps for travel ships, American organization was already starting to break their prior beliefs. The U.S. Army handled thousands of prisoners every day with a careful planning that surpassed anything the German Army had managed, even at its peak strength. But it was the food that gave the first mental shock. Feldwebel Hans Klein, captured with the 15th Panzer Division, wrote to his wife 6 months later from Camp McCain in Mississippi. In the pens at Tunis, while we waited for ships, the Americans gave us white bread with our meals. White bread. In Africa, we had been eating nekkebrot, a hard, crisp, whole wheat cracker when we were lucky. The American guards ate more bread at each meal than my squad had seen in a week. The Liberty ships that would carry them across the Atlantic were themselves monuments to American organization. These ships, made at a rate of 3 per day at their highest output, were coming back from taking supplies to Europe. The prisoners were usually sent on returning Liberty ships that would otherwise be empty, with as many as 30,000 arriving each month. Instead of the cattle cars they anticipated, They found themselves in ship holds that had been changed for carrying people, with airflow, lighting, and proper bathrooms. The 2-week Atlantic journey in July 1943 gave the second phase of the food surprise. Gefreiter Wilhelm Becker of the 21st Panzer Division kept a food journal that survived in letters to his family after he returned home. Breakfast: oatmeal with sugar and milk, white bread with butter, coffee with cream, he wrote on July 15th. This was food for officers in Germany, not regular troops. Yet here, even we prisoners got it. The meals served on the ships astonished the Germans. They found out that American commercial seamen ate steak, eggs, fresh vegetables, and ice cream. In Germany, this was a special treat saved for the top party leaders. The ship's refrigerator held more food energy than entire German units got in their daily rations. Lieutenant Heinrich Weber, whose Prussian military family had served Germany since the time of Frederick the Great, later wrote in his private writings, "As our ship neared the American coast, I watched sailors throwing away hardly eaten meals, whole dinners going overboard. I thought of my men in Africa, thankful for a handful of dates and salty water, and I started to see that we had been fighting not just an enemy, but a whole civilization beyond our understanding." August 2nd, 1943, Norfolk Naval Base, Virginia. The first meal on American soil destroyed the last traces of Nazi information about American frailty. Upon coming to America, the ease of the Pullman cars that took them to their prison camps surprised the Germans, as did the country's huge size and untouched wealth. But nothing readied them for the abundance waiting for them. At the processing station, they were served a meal that was unbelievable. Fried chicken, mashed potatoes with gravy, green beans, cornbread, apple pie, and coffee with real sugar. Unteroffizier Johann Fischer, a baker's son from Munich, figured in his diary that this one meal held more meat than his family's share for the month in Germany. "The Americans said sorry that the meal was simple because we had arrived without warning," Fischer wrote. Said sorry for food that German generals would have seen as a banquet. That moment showed the depth of our false belief. The train trip from Norfolk to the camps in Texas and Oklahoma would prove more damaging to Nazi beliefs than any defeat in battle. As the trains moved through Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee, and Arkansas, the prisoners looked closely out the windows, seeing an America that couldn't exist according to Nazi teachings. At every stop, they saw American railroad workers eating meat sandwiches, drinking bottles of Coca-Cola, and smoking cigarettes without a worry about limits. At a stop in Memphis, Tennessee, prisoners watched as a dining car was loaded with fresh supplies, sides of beef, crates of eggs, sacks of potatoes, and boxes of fresh vegetables. The amount loaded for one train was more than what whole German divisions had received in a month in Africa. Stabsgefreiter Rudolf Richter, a farm inspector from Westphalia before his draft, recorded what he saw. The amount of food moved daily on American railways could feed all of Germany. "I saw freight cars full of wheat, refrigerated cars carrying meat and milk, whole trains just for moving food from farms to cities. No military guards, no special protection. Food moved with the steadiness of flowing rivers." September 19th, 1943. Camp Hearn, Texas. The arrival at the long-term camps provided the next level of mental breakdown through food. The United States tried to make life as good as possible for the POWs for 2 reasons: to make sure American POWs were treated well, and to win the hearts of the German prisoners who would go back to rebuild a post-war Europe. The dining halls surpassed anything most German soldiers had known, even before the war. Electric refrigerators hummed all the time. Automatic dishwashers cleaned thousands of plates. Steam tables kept food warm for hours. Large mixers kneaded dough for fresh bread every day. POWs were promised by the Geneva Convention to get food, clothing, and medical care equal to that of their guards. At Camp Swift, Texas, Underoffizier Karl Hoffman was given the job of kitchen duty. What he found there would stay with him for many years. "Today we threw out 300 pounds of food," he wrote on September 23rd. "Not rotten food, but leftover from overcooking. The American rules demand preparing 10% more than needed to make sure every prisoner gets full servings. The extra is taken away." The daily food portion scale posted in the kitchen read like a dream: 3/4 of a pound of meat per day, 1 pound of potatoes, 1/2 pound of vegetables, 3/4 of a pound of bread, plus sugar, coffee, milk, butter, and eggs. The cost to feed prisoners was carefully handled by the government, with farmers who used POWs for labor paying 45 cents per hour for each worker to help balance the millions needed for the POW program. Feldwebel Hans Kleene, now at Camp McCain in Mississippi, wrote, "For breakfast, we get oatmeal or cornflakes with milk and sugar, scrambled eggs, bacon, toast with butter and jam, and coffee with cream. For lunch, meat, always meat, with vegetables, potatoes or rice, bread, and a dessert. For dinner, more meat, more vegetables, soup, bread, and coffee. On Sundays, we get chicken or turkey with all the traditional side dishes." The prisoners found out that American military food portions were much more than what German regular people had received even before the war. German civilian food shares had fallen to 2,078 calories in 1942-43, then to 1,281 calories in 1943-44. At the same time, German POWs in American camps were getting over 3,000 calories every day. At Camp Clinton, Mississippi, which kept the highest-ranking German officers, including 25 generals, the food situation was even more amazing. General von Arnim, Rommel's replacement, lived in a house and was given a car and driver. The generals had their own cooks and could ask for special meals. They ate steaks, roasted chickens, fresh fish, and vegetables that hadn't been obtainable for German civilians since 1940. But even the enlisted men's food shares shocked the prisoners. Obergefreiter Franz Müller wrote from Camp Shelby, "Today for lunch we had fried catfish caught fresh from Mississippi rivers. With it, coleslaw, hush puppies, a fried cornbread, green beans, and peach cobbler for dessert. The Negro soldiers who serve us eat the same food." In Germany, we were told Americans starve their Negro population. Another official lie revealed. October 1943. By fall, German POWs were working on American farms, and what they saw there finished the destruction of Nazi false stories about farming. From 1943, when the POWs arrived in large numbers, until the end of the war in 1945, the POWs in Texas picked peaches and citrus fruits, gathered rice, cut wood, baled hay, threshed grain, and collected pecans. At a dairy farm outside Huntsville, Texas, Unteroffizier Ernst Wagner watched in shock as the farmer poured out hundreds of gallons of milk because the processing plant couldn't handle the extra. "He poured it on the ground without concern," Wagner wrote. Milk that German mothers would have pleaded for their children was used to water pastures. When I objected, the farmer explained there was simply extra production. The price would drop if everything reached the market. About 12,000 prisoners of war were held in camps in Nebraska. They worked across the road from farms, stacking hay and working in the sugar beet fields. There, Gefreiter Paul Schmidt worked on a corn farm and wrote, "The farmers' chickens eat grain without limit. The farm cats get fresh milk daily. The dogs get meat scraps that would feed a German family for days." The American farmers who used POW labor often invited them to share meals. This broke no rules as long as guards were there. These meals in American farm kitchens had perhaps the most crushing mental impact. Farmers who contracted for POW workers usually provided meals for them. And these spreads were immense. Platters of fried chicken, bowls of mashed potatoes swimming in butter, green beans cooked with ham, corn on the cob dripping with butter, biscuits with gravy, multiple kinds of pie, pitchers of cold milk, and non-stop coffee. Christmas, 1943. The holiday meal delivered a mental impact from which many prisoners never got over. At Camp Hearn, Texas, the Christmas dinner menu read like a fantasy. Roast turkey with dressing, honey-glazed ham, mashed potatoes with giblet gravy, candied sweet potatoes, green beans, corn, cranberry sauce, fresh-baked rolls with butter, mince pie, pumpkin pie, apple pie with ice cream, coffee, milk, and apple cider. Feldwebel Hans Kleene wrote from Camp McCain, "We ate until we were sick. Not from bad food, but from the huge amount. Our stomachs, used to years of not enough food, could not handle such amounts. Men were crying while eating, remembering hungry families at home." The contrast with German food shares was sharp. German POWs in German camps got 9 pounds of potatoes per week, increased with 5 pounds of bread and 2.5 pounds of cabbage, with small amounts of margarine and ersatz coffee made from acorns. At the same time, German POWs in America were experiencing diet levels unknown since peacetime, March 1944. As spring came, the food situation in the camps became even more amazing. Fresh vegetables appeared daily: lettuce, tomatoes, cucumbers, radishes, carrots, celery. Fruits that had been things they couldn't even dream of in Germany: oranges, grapefruit, bananas, and strawberries in season. The variety alone overwhelmed men used to boring military food. The camp bakeries made fresh bread every day: white bread, whole wheat, rye, whatever the bakers decided. Prisoners who worked in the bakeries said they used more flour in a single day than German bakeries got in a month. Unteroffizier Johann Fischer, the baker's son, was assigned to the Camp Swift bakery. He wrote, "We bake 500 loaves daily for our compound alone. We make pastries, cakes, and cookies for special occasions. The sugar we use for one day's desserts would have supplied a German bakery for months." Summer 1944. The attack on Normandy on June 6th brought news that Germany was now fighting on 3 fronts. Yet the food situation in American POW camps remained the same. If anything, it got better as more prisoners were assigned to farm work and saw directly the origin of American wealth. In Nebraska, prisoners working in the sugar beet fields found out that American farmers grew more sugar beets in one county than several German regions combined. At a canning factory in Arkansas, prisoners saw tons of perfectly good peaches being rejected for small flaws. Meanwhile, at Fort Lewis in Washington state, a different group of German POWs was having similar discoveries. Among them would be 18-year-old Günther Grave, who arrived in August 1944 after being captured in Normandy. Standing in front of the camp canteen in August or September 1944, thinking what to buy first, an ice cream or a bottle of Coca-Cola, he would later write, "The last ice cream I had been able to buy in Germany was years ago, but Coca-Cola never before. So I decided to take both. I suddenly understood how very fortunate I had been to be captured by the American Army and not the Russian one." September 1944. After more than a year as prisoners, many German POWs had put on 20 to 30 pounds. Medical checkups showed improved health by all measures: better teeth from regular milk intake, stronger bones from enough protein, and clearer skin from vitamins in fresh vegetables and fruits. Dr. Friedrich Boever, a German medical officer held at Camp Shelby, Mississippi, recorded the health change. The men who arrived as prisoners were underfed, many suffering from scurvy, pellagra, and other sicknesses from poor diet. After 1 year of American food, they are healthier than they have ever been. Their physical change is extraordinary. The mental impact went even deeper. Gefreiter Wilhelm Becker wrote, "We no longer speak of a German victory. How can we defeat a nation that feeds prisoners so well while fighting a war on multiple fronts? This level of supplies shows an unbeatable edge." December 1944. The Battle of the Bulge was Germany's last major attack. Yet in American POW camps, Christmas dinner 1944 surpassed even the previous year's celebration. Turkey, ham, roast beef, all the traditional side dishes, plus special foods. Fruit cakes shipped from American bakeries. Candy canes, chocolate, real chocolate. Not the substitute type made from turnips that had become standard in Germany. Nuts and fresh fruit. At Camp Clinton, Mississippi, Italian POWs, who had switched sides after Italy's capitulation, were allowed to help make special pasta dishes for Christmas. The German POWs watched as their former friends, now working with Americans, prepared food with ingredients: olive oil, real cheese, white flour, that had disappeared from German tables years earlier. May 8, 1945, Victory in Europe Day. The war was over, but the food eye-openers kept coming. German POWs learned that through the whole war, American regular people had never dealt with serious food limits. Meat had been limited, sugar and coffee restricted, but Americans never knew true hunger. The vastness of American agriculture had never been touched by war. In May 1945, the Office of the Provost Marshal General limited available food and ended canteen food sales. Civilians had complained that the prisoners were eating too well. Even with smaller portions, German POWs continued to get more food than German civilians would see for years after the war. The statistics, when finally put together, showed a certain truth. German POWs in America ate an average of 3,200 calories per day. German soldiers in battle were supposed to get 3,600 calories when supplies reached them, which was harder and harder to get. German civilians by 1945 got fewer than 1,412 calories daily. American camps served about 3/4 of a pound of meat per prisoner each day. The German weekly military share included 120 grams of sausage or tinned fish when it was there. The contrast between American plenty and German lack had become the strongest case against Nazi beliefs, not through words, but through daily experience. Summer 1945. As German prisoners of war got ready to go home, many pleaded to stay in America. They had seen a farming system that changed their idea of what was possible. Hans Waker, a POW at Fort Robinson, Nebraska, later remembered, "Life in the camps was a big step up for many of us who had grown up in cold water flats in Germany. We discovered running water, central heating, and plentiful food. Our handling was wonderful. The retraining program accomplished its greatest good result through meals rather than talks. Each day, German prisoners faced proof that went against Nazi lessons about American weakness. Every full stomach questioned their old ideas about being a better race and democratic poor performance." Dr. Walter Schreiber, a former Wehrmacht colonel and agricultural economist, figured out after the war, the food America provided to German prisoners could have fed the entire German Sixth Army at Stalingrad. Their extra supply of food would have fed all of taken over Europe. We never understood we were fighting a nation that had solved the basic issue of human life, how to feed everyone. Between 1945 and 1946, 371,683 German POWs were sent home from American camps. They returned to a Germany that was ruined, split, and hungry. But they brought priceless information: that wealth was possible, that a society could feed all its people, that democratic systems could create plenty rather than disorder. Many former POWs became heads in West Germany's farming transformation. Hans Müller, held at Camp Shelby, brought in American farming ways to Bavaria, growing 40% more food within 5 years. Wilhelm Fischer from Camp McCain helped set up supply chains based on American examples. Friedrich Bover pushed for the diet rules he had seen in American prison camps. After returning home, about 5,000 Germans moved to the United States, and thousands more would have come if allowed. They looked for not just economic chances, but the food safety they had found as prisoners. October 1947, Fort Lewis, Washington. Among the last German POWs to be sent back was Günter Grave, who had spent 3 years as a prisoner. Many years later, he would return to America as a thriving businessman. But he never forgot that moment at the camp canteen when he could choose between ice cream and Coca-Cola, special treats his family in Germany could only imagine. We always were treated with just treatment. Got enough food and 80 cents a day that gave us the opportunity to buy cigarettes. Chocolate, ice cream, and Coca-Cola, he would write 73 years later. Things my mother and sister in Germany could only dream of. 85. Austin, Texas. At the 40th anniversary gathering of German POWs, over 500 former prisoners returned to America, many bringing their families to show them where their change had started. Former Unteroffizier Karl Hoffmann, now 78 years old and an American resident since 1955, gave a talk that summed up their time. "We came to America as fighters of the Third Reich, sure that our race was better, positive that American democracy was weak. We left as people who saw a deep fact. America's strength came from its output, not its racial purity. Every meal in the prison camps questioned our ideas. The Americans fed us, their enemies, better than Hitler fed us, his soldiers. They had such an extra supply that waste was normal. This wasn't making fun of us, but a simple fact. We learned that a nation able to feed its enemies without difficulty has reached a real win. A society with such supplies has done what the Third Reich never could, beating lack itself. We went back to Germany knowing our whole way of thinking was built on lies. The Americans had won through their farming superiority and industrial ability. We who had marched as victors had been changed by seeing plenty beyond belief. To America, from your former enemies, thank you for showing that strength comes from building, not tearing down. You fed us when we would have let you go hungry. That kindness and victory shows real strength." The room broke out in long clapping. Americans and Germans together, past foes, united in acknowledgement of a change that had started with a simple meal in June 1943. The story of German POWs and American food shows how a deep shift can happen through experience rather than debate. The German soldiers who saw American farming ability became living proof of democracy's real-world achievement. Their change started not with government talks but with daily meals, not with official information but with what they saw for themselves. Each meal questioned Nazi beliefs more well than any school learning could have done. The change was so total that when former POW Gunter Grave returned to Fort Lewis in 2017 at age 91, he rode a bicycle across the base with signs reading, "USA, the country and its people. You are my first and final love. It was in August 1944 when I came here for the first time as a prisoner of war. We always were treated with fairness. Got sufficient food and 80 cents a day. That gave us the chance to buy cigarettes, chocolate, ice cream, and Coca-Cola. Things my mother and sister in Germany could only dream of. That's why I have come here 73 years later to say thank you, America. I will never forget it." Colonel William Purcell, Joint Base Lewis McChord's second in command, welcomed him with these words. "You remind us that how you treat somebody shows who we are. There are times even today when we may want to forget that, and you let us know that's a teaching not to be forgotten." The German POWs experienced American farming ability and were deeply affected by it. They arrived as enemies, left as observers, and many returned as new residents and friends. Their children would grow up in a democratic Germany, friends with the United States, a friendship built on understanding gained through unexpected kindness. The camps themselves left few signs behind. Most were taken apart after the war, their buildings sold or torn down, their land returned to farms or changed for other uses. But their effect lasted in the thoughts of those who experienced them and in the democratic rebuilding of Germany that followed. The Marshall Plan, which would feed and rebuild Europe, continued the teaching learned in POW camps, that kindness in victory makes peace that lasts. Former POWs who did well in post-war Germany often gave praise to their American camp time as life-changing. They had seen wealth achieved through working together rather than taking over, different races working efficiently, and democratic systems producing riches rather than confusion. These lessons, learned through daily experience, proved more powerful than any classroom learning. Dr. Arnold Kramer, the top expert on German POWs in America, decided, America won the information battle not through smart words, but through plain fact. Every meal, every electric light, every working toilet was a case against Nazism. The POWs were changed by the wealth they could see, touch, and sample. The numbers don't show everything. Yes, 371,683 German POWs were held in America. Yes, they worked 14 million workdays in farm labor. Yes, fewer than 1% tried to get away. But the real story is in the personal change through the simple act of eating well while being treated with respect. When modern historians look at post-war German democracy's good outcome, they often point to the Marshall Plan, programs to remove Nazi ideas, or the danger from Russia. But they sometimes miss the 370,000 German soldiers who returned home having experienced American democracy as daily food, being treated well despite being enemies, and supplies shared rather than kept for themselves. These men became representatives for democracy, each one affecting family, friends, and towns with their experience. They had lived within the supposed enemy system and found it better in every noticeable way. This certain reality proved Nazi beliefs wrong more well than any information war. When the last German POW left American shores in 1946, they left behind an amazing history, the lowest escape rate of any major POW population in history, the highest rate of willing help with camp leaders, and the most successful positive change of enemy fighters into future friends, all done not through tough handling or strong official information, but through simple kindness and plentiful food. The effort America made in feeding its prisoners through farming supplies and organizational work gave back huge benefits. Hundreds of thousands of Germans who had experienced democracy directly, who understood that American strength came from its ability to make things rather than ideas about race, who knew that Nazi information was a complete lie. In the end, the German POW's time in America proved that real strength is in the ability to make and give plenty, The fact that America could feed its enemies better than Germany could feed its own soldiers showed basic facts about different ways of life that no amount of official information could beat. The German POWs arrived in America thinking they would find weakness and separation. Instead, they found farming and industrial ability of endless size, combined with unexpected kindness. They came as captives, but left as observers of democratic success. In their change lay the beginnings of the Atlantic Alliance, the Marshall Plan, and a rebuilt democratic Germany. They had experienced American plenty and would never forget. Their kids' would grow up in a wealthy, democratic Germany, friends with the United States, members of NATO, and citizens of the European Union. All of it can be linked, in part, to that moment when hungry Africa Corps soldiers ate their first American meal and realized their whole outlook was based on falsehoods. Food had affected the war's result as strongly as any weapon. Meals had changed minds as totally as any fight, and in that win lay the base for long-term quiet, built not on dangers, but on the hope of wealth for all. The German POWs were amazed by American prison food that was better than their army's food portions, and through that amazement came change. In their change lay hope for a world where past foes could become friends, where democracy could win not through power, but through the game-changing action of feeding everyone, even those who had come as destroyers.